Sunny's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on elsewhere in terms of mapping.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me to the stage and to be able to present to you all, especially after lunch. I know everybody gets kind of sleepy, and they thought, well, Sunny's hyper and energetic, so let's put her on stage. So here I am. I am very passionate about maps, but I've only ever been passionate about maps and GIS technology through the lens of applying it to the work we do as public servants, which is where I'm very, very passionate about it. So I always start a presentation with a little bit of a story, and then I tie it in so it'll feel very non sequitur, but I promise it's relevant. And I was thinking last night, kind of chuckling about the one and only time I ever gambled with real money. And that was in Kentucky, imagine that. And the story goes, I travel a lot for work, and when you travel a lot for work, you meet all sorts of interesting people. And this woman one time, I was flying home from Virginia, and she gets on the plane and she plops her food in my lap. And I was like, you are nutty, what are you doing? And then she starts pulling out all of these papers, and it's going everywhere, and they have all these charts and information on it, and I just had to start talking to her. I was like, who is this crazy lady? And so I'm asking her, what do you do? And she says, well, I'm a horse financer. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so she starts telling me all about her horse, yada, yada, yada. Well, my husband and I had already planned that weekend to take a long vacation and go to Louisville. And so I thought, well, when in Rome, I'm going to place a bet on her horse. And so I bet $35. Why 35? I put in 30, and then my father, to humor me, gave me $5. And we just kind of forgot about it. And I got home that night, or back to the hotel that night, and we decided to check what the status was. And the race was that day. It was a qualifying race for the Derby, and I had won $500. So how is this relevant to what I want to talk about today? Well, I was thinking last night, what is the difference between a bet and a decision? And we in public service make a lot of decisions. We're making permit decisions, we're making policy decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these decisions have impacts on our communities, on our economies, on our quality of life. And something that I share with Kentucky is an experience with flooding. So I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I survived Helene. And I see flooding as a shared struggle. My mother-in-law lives in Ashland, Kentucky. They have experienced flooding. And then shortly after Helene, of course, Kentucky experienced their floods. And I want to think about kind of the idea of what it means to gamble and the spectrum of how we make decisions. And the difference between gambling and making a decision is really information. So let's put this in the context of Helene. So after Helene happened, we went 54 days without water. And the pictures here are from my bike route. I really like to bicycle. And I took the one in the top during fair weather, and you can see that the river runs underneath it. It's beautiful. Families would go there and just recreate in that. And then the main water line, that's a 25-inch main water line that feeds all of the city of Asheville. We have a single water source, a massive reservoir. After Helene, and kind of off the picture, this pipe goes underground, and the river no longer goes under the bridge anymore. It's completely rerouted. And so we have all these orphaned bridges in western North Carolina now where the river no longer even goes under the bridge. And the water ripped out the infrastructure. It went 25 feet down into the earth, and it moved about 50 feet over. And so that ripped our water infrastructure out. Ironically, the decision, or maybe the bet that we had made as a city way back in 2004 when a hurricane did this once to us already, was that 25 feet down to bury our infrastructure would be good enough. And I think that's really interesting because the information that we were going on is that this is a once in a 1,000-year event. And then yet, a couple weeks later, a once in a 1,000-year event happened just to our neighbors in Kentucky. And guess what? Prior in my life, I used to live in Nashville, Tennessee, and we had a once in a 1,000-year event. I mean, I bet $35 and made $500 back, and then also I've experienced 3 different, natural disasters that are supposed to be 1,000-year events. The odds are clearly in my favor. So we went 54 days without water. 106 lives were lost. I think that number may be a little outdated. 8,000 jobs were lost immediately. The impact, and there's a lot of different estimates on this, and so this is kind of a middle of the road estimate, 60 billion in economic loss, and 43% of small businesses are probably going to close, 20% addition to that in the next 2 years. So when I think about the idea of a bet versus a decision, and the odds of 1 in 1,000, and the stakes, which are on the screen here, this is how I kind of start to think about how do we make decisions as public servants, and how do we feel confident in our decision versus just gambling and making a bet. And I really feel quite passionately that information is the way that we make better decisions. And that everything we do as public servants, especially when we're working in the state, or we're a partner of the state, or we're an industry of the state, et cetera, happens in a location. And so therefore, the way that we manage information and the way that we make decisions about governance should be tied to geography. And luckily, there is a technology that helps us do that. But I feel like this technology, generally speaking, not everywhere, is really underutilized. People go, oh yeah, GIS, yeah, you're the map girl. You know, can you make me a map of this? Can you make me a map of that? And I'm like, yeah, I can, but I could also make you a tool that's updated in real time, and you can just have it on your phone or use it whenever, and you don't even ever have to come talk to me ever again, so long as it's working, right? And that's how we should really start thinking about this technology, not as a static map, but as a functioning system that supports the work we do day to day. And some examples, I'll have lots of examples I go through, but keeping it on this disaster response theme for a minute, environmental agencies all over the US and all over the globe have a role and a responsibility in responding to environmental disasters. And when Helene hit, it wasn't just Western North Carolina that got hit, but it was also Tennessee. It was also a little bit of Virginia. I'm sure Kentucky had some impacts as well. And if we go to that slide, you'll see this data set in the top right here is from the state of Tennessee. And it was an exercise that they went through with the University of Vanderbilt years before Helene ever hit. And it was a very laborious exercise. They almost gave up on it. The university wanted to do this very kind of academic approach to it. TDEC just wanted the data. There was a lot of tension there. Funding was coming and going. Students were coming and going. But they came up with this data set of predicted water service area boundaries across the state of Tennessee. And once they got the data set, well, just kind of sat there for a while. They were just kind of babysitting it. And when Helene hit, that data set turned into something critically valuable. They were all of a sudden able to use this data set and put it into a dashboard that was showing updates in real time to the water service status in those areas, the populations affected, so on and so forth. And if you're familiar with kind of processes in disaster response, during emergencies, agencies can have certain authorities. And so TDEC, their commissioner, has an authority to set boil water standards, things like that. Well, the situation was so dynamic after Helene that for him to constantly update this legal document and send it out was a really laborious process. It wasn't practical. So they just stopped doing it. And they started pointing everyone to this dashboard that was using a data set that they had just kind of taken for granted and was sitting around. And it's a fantastic example, and we've had them speak now at CIO Summit. They were using Survey 123, another component of this technology, to help people apply for well testing systems after that. And they had it all on a map, so they were able to allocate resources. They were able to be very specific about how they spent those funds, and very efficient and very quick. And a lot of this happened in North Carolina too. There's examples here from federal government, from state government, and from county government, and how they're utilizing GIS to both prepare, respond, and rebuild using geographic information systems. So that's lesson one. Don't think about it as a static map. Think about it as a system. So speaking of that, I keep saying this thing, geographic information systems, what is it? It's not just a map. It really does support holistic workflows. And the reason why is because when we think about, I challenge you all to think about something that occurs that is not tied to a place on Earth. And usually people will be like, oh, you know, my credit card statement or something. I'm like, no, like you buy something somewhere, and then there's a company somewhere that's reaping that benefit. So there's still where is tied to that. In my mind, I don't think there's a data set out there that isn't tied to geography somehow. And I challenge you to kind of think about that. So when we look at Geographic Information Systems, it's a technology that pulls in all sorts of different data sets. You know, it used to be that we'd be going out with maybe a GPS or a paper map way back in the day, right? And tying some point to a place on Earth. But now we have satellites flying around the world, taking all sorts of information, snapshots of the Earth, shooting lasers at the Earth and getting different information back. I mean, it's such a rich, there's just such a rich depth of information that's now tied to our planet that we can use in our daily work. And it's not science fiction, it's tools that we already own and use, but we can push it further. GIS in disaster response, I find really interesting. It's kind of like, you know, in many ways, especially in the environmental profession, we are always disaster response. We're always disaster preparedness. We are trying to protect people from something bad that can happen, right? And so it's either happening slowly and we're trying to prevent it, or it's happened and we're responding to it, and that's what we consider disaster response, right? But that's really no different. No matter what, we have people that are out in the field, either inspectors or responding to a disaster, doesn't matter, and they have to be collecting information and sending it in and collaborating and communicating. They have to manage that information. Someone in the office is managing this data and having to ask questions of it, visualizing it, analyzing it, and we can do this now in real time. So this one that's animated comes from the LA fires, where we were tracking the aircrafts in real time that were responding to the fire. And you can see there's very specific patterns that pull out of this, where the fire was happening, the response, the aerial response to this starts to shift and change. And we were able to track this in real time so that our operational awareness with everyone responding to this disaster, we were all on the same page about where resources were being allocated. We've also worked on a lot of different disasters, but another one is the Key Bridge. So when the shipping containers hit the Key Bridge and it collapsed, we were immediately on site. Business partners of ours were flying LiDAR. We were taking environmental digital twins of what was going on and immediately able to assess that. Let's see, okay, move forward. All right, so GIS. I don't want to, maybe this is a terrible metaphor for Kentucky. I don't want to beat a dead horse. It's a terrible metaphor for Kentucky. I don't know, are we allowed to say that anymore? Anyways, so GIS, it really facilitates emergency response and recovery, but I said, you know, this isn't really emergency response, it's just our daily work. Daily business generates information. We have customers and stakeholders who are submitting a permit application, and there's information in that permit application. That should be geographic. We should be receiving that information geographically and centralizing it, because that data can unlock really interesting insights. Those insights can be turned into tools. Don't ask me for a map, but ask me for a tool, right? That's a very different discussion. These tools can inform how we plan and make decisions, move us away from making a bet and turning it into making a decision. And geo-enabling, so turning our business systems into geographically centered workflows, makes this feasible. And so an example here is from the East Palestine derailment. The first one in the top right is from Pennsylvania DEP, and then the one in the kind of bottom is from EPA. And they're using actually very similar data sets. And if you were to kind of blow the map up and look at it and look at all the data sets that are on there, you'll see that it comes from federal agencies, it comes from state agencies, it comes from local governments, there's parcels on there, there's transportation, there's an existing environmental, like known environmental assets or known environmental hazards, and all of it is coming together on a map because they're using the shared language of geography. They're all using GIS, and this allows them to respond to this immediately and have that common operating picture. Just because their daily business generates this information already, and they're already managing it geographically. So when I think about this through, okay, well, what are some things that we might want to look at in daily business of being an environmental professional that we might want to modernize? And one of the hottest topics of discussion, and it's actually been this way for a long time through many different administrations, is around this idea of streamlining permitting. And this is something that I get really nerdy about, and it's one of my favorite topics, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about. And so I brought a couple examples here. And this first one that I really love comes from South Carolina Natural Heritage Program. If you're aware, Kentucky also has a heritage program, and it's housed in EEC, and my friend Heidi is part of that. She's a botanist, and she's here. So Heidi, hi. So I'm very proud of our heritage programs because they've actually been managing data geographically for a really, really long time. And they are not regulators, but this data that they manage goes into the regulatory process. And so if we're making it difficult for people to get this information and use it in their environmental screening, they're gonna find ways around it. And so South Carolina realized that this was a problem, and they completely overhauled their environmental screening process using GIS. And this quote comes from South Carolina. I think there were a lot of people who weren't submitting projects to us because it was slow, and every day is more money, and also because it wasn't made very easy for them. And if that's not really what we're talking about in a nutshell, I don't know what is. So a couple years ago, Tennessee, TDEC, started on this journey with their septic permitting process. So Middle Tennessee is, we called it the poop project at ESRI. So Middle Tennessee is one of the fastest growing areas of the Southeast, but also of the US. And they're getting all of these requests in for septic permitting from housing developments, et cetera, things like that. 40,000 requests this year alone already, which is crazy. And they were taking about 34,000 man hours prior to modernizing, just in planning their route to go inspect these things and finish the permit process. I mean, that's a ton of money and man hours spent on just trying to figure out where you're gonna go. They've already had a 20% ROI. They completed the project just last year. They have real-time KPIs now that they're able to measure instead of a laborious annual reporting process where they try and gather this from Excel spreadsheets. They have operational intelligence now, but I think one of the best things about this is that because they have better data, they have better accountability. The staff are more motivated because they can see themselves in this process and they don't feel like their effort is going into some spreadsheet that's not seen by anyone. And they have greater trust in customer service now, and it's been really, really successful. And so they're really doing a great job to utilize GIS. But who do I look to when I talk to other states? I have a handful of states that I consider lighthouse accounts, and Kentucky is one of them, Tennessee is one of them, Missouri is one of them, and Michigan is one of them. So 4. And I'm really proud of Kentucky because I often look at Kentucky to see what you all are doing when I talk to other states. GIS is something that's understood even by the leadership at EEC. Kenya, who you're gonna hear from next, has been an amazing advocate for GIS. She's always coming up with amazing ideas for how it's utilized. So is Amanda. And we really see that in the products that are coming out of Kentucky. They were one of the first states I ever saw to take the Clean Water Act reporting that they have to do every year. Every state has to do this. And how many of you have read it? Like, maybe 2 hands are gonna go up, right? Because nobody reads those reports in any state that you're from. And they thought, well, that's a problem. Yeah, we can put all this effort into reporting on this, but if no one's really interacting with it and using it, what's the point? And so they were one of the first states, they were the first state I ever saw to stand up an ArcGIS hub and make interactive maps that people can look at and understand this really heady scientific stuff in a way that's intuitive. People know where. They know where they live, they know where they're going, they know what's important to them. And it's true during disaster response as it is in our daily life. Kentucky was also one of the first states I ever saw to do a model for appropriate places to develop solar in Kentucky. And they didn't just keep it to themselves internally. No, they published it, you all published it, so that industry could look at that and understand, okay, the level of effort here to do this is probably going to be lower. And so I would prefer to make my investment here than here, right? It helps them make better decisions, and it helps your economy, and it helps you, like, I've been so inspired by these discussions this morning about the alternative fuels, and there was a whole geographic analysis on siting and how to kind of boost these economies and where the supply chain is, I mean, that was all GIS based, and it's all tied to both sustainability and resilience, but also your economy. It was amazing. And of course, Kentucky EEC is responsible for responding to disasters as well. I chose this screenshot because the same tornadoes that went through Kentucky were the same tornadoes that went through Tennessee when I was living there. So I was like, yeah, it's great to see this. I lived through that too. So a lot of personal ties to the work going on here. Move forward. Oh, look at all my little animations. They hold me up. All right. So I hope you're feeling inspired. I hope that you understand that it's not just a static map, that these are really holistic workflows that can support your daily business. And if you want to kind of push that boundary a little more and get started and get going and kind of catalyze it in your own area, whether you're private industry or whether you're on the state side or a local government, it doesn't matter. You all already own this technology. We publish these things called solutions, and we usually work in partnership with our customers to build out solutions. And I think of them as these like empty little templates of workflows, just kind of waiting for you to use them. So they're free to deploy. And I've put some, we have over 100 of them. So this is just a handful of them that I think are really tied directly to classic themes of sustainability and resilience, especially as it relates to natural hazards. So I encourage you to, you probably have you're thinking, oh yeah, we got the GIS person. Go talk to your GIS person and be like, have you heard of these things? Let's toy around with them, let's play with them, right? And deploy these. So I encourage you to do that. But also, it's not always just that easy, so I want to make sure that you all are aware, and I know Kentucky EEC is because they've worked with us on this, but we have a professional services arm, so if you need some hand-holding, we can help you with that. If it's not appropriate for our wheelhouse, we have 3,000 business partners, some of who are out here. Deloitte is one of them, that can help with all sorts of things. And the one that I've highlighted here is geospatial strategy. I think it's critical. Before you ever take a step to make a decision, right? Don't make a bet, make a decision. Have a strategy, have a reason why you do it. You have this technology, you can take it further, and you need to kind of plan what that looks like. So we also have services that focus just specifically on that. But more importantly, for ESRI as a company, and certainly for me as kind of representing and being a liaison to the environmental industry, community collaboration is really important. There's a lot of people in this room, you're probably not a GIS analyst, right? And so that conversation between the non-technical people and the technical people needs to happen more often. Don't feel intimidated by the technology. Don't even feel like you have to know how to spell GIS. Just go to them, and instead of asking for a map, ask for a tool. Change the conversation. Talk to them about the challenges and the things that keep you up at night, and see if there aren't ways that they can apply the technical expertise to help solve that challenge. So I think of like lunch and learns. We put on a bunch of conferences, talk to our solutions teams, look at those 100 solutions and go, well, there's not one for this. I want that. Reach out to me, let me know. With that, ooh, look, it made it prettier. All right, with that, I really do encourage you to keep in touch with me. My whole role at ESRI is that I am our liaison to the environmental industry back to the company. We want to make sure that these tools that you've invested in serve their purpose for you. We want to hear your challenges, and we want to be able to be part of that and make sure that you all are continuing to do the awesome work that I always look to when I talk to other states. So with that, I think I have time for some questions.
So, Sunny, we've got one question. How is AI changing GIS? Is it a game changer or just more data?
Ooh, okay. I totally forgot about some of these to talk about AI. I had it on a slide and I didn't even mention it. Okay, so AI, the way that we speak about AI at ESRI, first of all, we call it geographic AI. Of course we do, right? Everything happens somewhere. AI is one of those things that I think we need to be prepared for. We need to understand how it works, because I guarantee you're probably not really ready to deploy it. AI, the reason that it should scare you is because AI is actually just a reflection of us. And what I mean by that is that if we have sloppy data, and think of what that means, right? A spreadsheet where maybe a city is spelled 10 different ways, or a county is spelled different ways, or there's only dates in some of the columns, right? Well, that will inform how an AI might ingest that, train itself on it, and then spit out a response. So if your data is messy, which I guarantee it is, it's not going to give you a good response. And that's problematic. That's a liability for us. So one of the things that we really talk about with geographic AI and GIS is to have a strategy, right? I want to emphasize that. Have a geospatial strategy, and part of that is looking at preparedness for it. But then also, in some ways, GeoAI has been around for a long time. So the solar sighting tool that I mentioned earlier, that is a function of a deep learning, of modeling something across a state and making inferences around that. So that's kind of an earlier evolution of AI, and now it's just evolving to, it's kind of hard to explain, train on more data, bigger data, messier data. So I want to be pragmatic about it. It's exciting. There's a lot of ways we can use it, but we also need to make sure that we have strategies for it and that we're prepared and we know just enough about it to be able to kind of ask questions and scrutinize it.
Other questions? So Sunny, I have another question, because we as states often have requirements for data management and things like that, and retrieval for open records requests and things like that. Working with other states, how do other states manage that? Because GIS is a tool, right? But we also have regulatory requirements for data management. So can you speak to any of that? I know that's a little bit vague, but.
No, I mean, it definitely comes up, and I'll speak to it more from maybe my personal experience when I was working with the state of Tennessee. So for example, the heritage data that we collected, which was on our rare, threatened, and endangered species in the state of Tennessee, is protected under our sunshine laws. And so even though it's a data set, it was protected from open records requests, and there are ways to manage that with different kinds of securities. But also, especially for that kind of data set, this isn't always the case, but there are ways to provide information out without revealing its exact location and giving that up. So a good example is like if you turn your whole state into a bunch of series of little hex bins, and then quantify a value, it gives you a sense of patterns across the state without revealing the underlying data. So there's ways to deal with that and manage that. And every state's obviously very different with your policies around open records. So
Good deal.
part of your geospatial strategy.
Roberta's got a question. I should, might have to turn it on.
Well, I can hear you, and I can repeat the question maybe.
Okay, great.
Just want to make other people be able to hear me too. What kinds of digital accessibility tools is ESRI looking toward? You know, these maps are phenomenal for people who can see them and can manipulate a mouse and things like that. What's on the horizon for people with visual disabilities, mobile disabilities, and things like that?
Yes, so ESRI has a whole site dedicated to accessibility with maps. The first obvious place to start, of course, is with different kinds of visual impairments or color blindness. So we definitely have recommendations for color charts to use for people who are colorblind. We have tools that can help you, like maybe you've made a map and you want to understand what it might look like to people with different abilities, so you can change it back and forth. But visual is just one kind of disability. There's also, if you don't have sight at all, then how do you use a map? And we have definitely worked with organizations to implement maps that, it's hard to explain for someone who can see, but if you're browsing it on a computer, it will like talk to you and tell you about the geographic information that is on the screen. And then of course with static maps, there are ways to create Braille maps, which is really interesting and intriguing. Those tend to be, those latter examples have been special kind of ad hoc custom projects that we've implemented, but certainly with the roadmap to have more systemic capabilities like that throughout our stack. But the color, of course, is an easy one. So yeah, thanks for that.
Anyone else have a question?
You were talking about how Kentucky with the water health portal was the first. I'm kind of curious if we beat the EPA with their How's My Waterway, if we were before even the EPA.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm going to have to look that up now as a trivia question. I was thinking more at the state perspective. EPA also has some really good GIS work going on as well. In fact, we have invited them to our user conference to speak at our special interest group meeting for environment. So I don't know, I'll look that up, but I do feel fairly confident that as a state entity, you all were the first state, and I have since seen a couple others pop up. So you were definitely trendsetters in that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sunny. We appreciate your time this
Thank you.
afternoon and just sort of letting us know what the playing field looks like. So we're actually going to head into a very quick break. I think 20 minutes, if you'll come back in 20 minutes, and we'll start our last session of the day.